Welcome. It is Tuesday night, and this is episode 103, I think. We had some question about our actual order here about a week ago, so I think we're actually in line. There was some kind of miss somewhere, and we were way out of...
Your episode.
Are we at the right episode?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right.
We were one episode.
Okay. We're like one episode off, but anyway, tonight should be 103. Tonight we're talking about Jesus and university. As always, my name is Jordan. I am going to be answering or asking the questions tonight. And joining me tonight for a special guest appearance is Joe Tedesco, who can say hello so we make sure the scene switcher's working.
Hello. It's not working.
Not
I'm
working.
Too quiet. There we go.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're just going to have to use some bass in your voice.
I got to get closer to the mic, apparently.
All right.
I'm not loud enough.
As always, we are totally open for questions tonight. We are going to be talking about Jesus and university, mainly because Joe is a university grad, came out of Cal Berkeley, and was raised in church. I've known Joe for a long time, actually. We weren't ever very close, but we just knew each other. We knew of each other, went to different churches, but grew up interacting quite a bit. Our churches were pretty involved with each other growing up. And so yeah. I knew your family, you knew mine. But so you were raised in church and raised to be a Christian. Were both of your parents saved when you decided to go to university?
No, I mean, that was probably an issue. Because my dad was hit and miss as I was growing up with Christianity.
So you're raised in church. Now, let me ask you this. What was the intention of your mom and dad when it came to church? Were they, or not their intention, and this isn't hey, let's throw our parents under the rug here. That's totally not my intention. So let me ask the question in such a way that doesn't make it sound that way. But were your parents you need to be a Christian, or were they really strict with, you guys going to church and stuff like that? Or was it more you guys have to decide on your own? What was the atmosphere of your home growing up?
I think we were never forced to go to church. I'm trying to remember back now. That's a good question. I know my mom strongly encouraged, and for the most part, made sure we were all going to church. My dad, when he was going, I guess it was just never really a question. It's if it was time for church, when you were living in their house, you were going to church. There were occasions where, we had some kind of event or something like that where we'd be late, or a Saturday thing. We, had sports and stuff like that growing up, so we missed some outreaches and stuff like that. But for the most part, we didn't really miss church. When you were living in their house, that was one of the things. It was you're in the house, you go. I don't remember ever questioning that.
So it wasn't a conscious force. It was just kind of how you guys lived. It's just what you were doing. Yeah,
it was just something we did. I'm trying to talk a little louder so I might, but yeah, we just did it. I remember, rushing out of sporting events to go to church. I think the only time I saw someone in my family not go was when my dad stopped going to church. But even then, I think we all still went, without my dad.
Mm-hmm.
There was always something he's working late or something like that at first.
Yeah.
But
so where, how old were you when you went to college?
Let's see. 22.
Okay. So
somewhat, 21, I guess would be. Yeah, about 21.
Okay. So what were you what was your, I don't know if you can remember this far back, but what would you say is let me just give you the premise. We'll just kind of start off with the premise here. University is often there is a school of thought even in the Christian circle that says Christians should avoid going to university. Church kids don't encourage your kids to go to university and stuff like that. There's like the whole idea of calling and just follow your calling. Don't universities for worldly people and I personally disagree with that, but I have to say that there is somewhat of a black hole for some kids who are raised in church when it comes to university. They go to university and all of a sudden they become something different. Like their minds are, changed. All of a sudden they're growing up in church. They believe in God. They might even have some sense of calling, and then they go to church or they go to university, and it's like all of a sudden they become like, atheists or spiritualists. And one guy I know became a Buddhist in college. Like it was like all of a sudden these schools of thought that are being taught throughout university have way more influence on them than the way that they were raised. And so the question I have is, where does God fit in university, and what was your experience growing up in church with the intention from your household, not necessarily being, this heavy-handed, you're going to be a Christian, but more like, hey, this is real, and you guys are going to have to make a decision on your own at some point. But you decided to go to school, and did you like stop becoming a Christian? Did you stop doing those things, or did you keep going to church? And
there's a lot there. Let's
so I gave you the premise. Yeah. Here's the question: where were you at when you first went to college spiritually?
That's a long answer, I guess. There's no short answer because I didn't know where I was at. And this is, I think you made some good observations. I mean, in some ways, college can be a black hole, because I think it's one of those things where it sounds so cliche, but it's like where you're finding yourself, right? You're moving out of your parents' house. You're going out and doing stuff on your own for the first time. So it's so for me it was like, okay, I now can be and do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. There's no limitations. I mean just thinking about it, and just like, okay, like when you first move out of your parents' house, most kids see it as like a freedom opportunity. It's like, okay, I am now the adult. No one can tell me what to do. I live in my own house. I have my own car. So for me, going to college was that kind of moment. It's like, okay, what am I going to decide to do from here on out? Mm-hmm. I didn't go instantly going, oh, I don't believe in God at all. No, initially when I left for college, I still believed in God. Whether or not I was saved at the time, I guess that's questionable. I have my doubts. But I mean, to be honest, like it wasn't. I look back. I thought about this because I wasn't 100% sure where you're going to go, but I had an idea for this podcast, and I was like, okay, like looking back, I was like, honestly, I don't believe the idea that like, oh, don't encourage your kids to go to college. It's just going to turn them into atheists, Buddhists, whatever. Like, no, I think it's going to just show you that your kid is going to find themselves, and they're going to be like, look, I'm free to do whatever I want. And it's going to show you what you created. Mm-hmm. I mean, you raised the kid for 18 years. Now it's like, okay, well, what happens next is the product of those 18 years.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I went to junior college first, so I was close to home, semi out of the house. But I never, I was studying engineering, which is, looking back, far different than most people. Like when you study like arts and stuff like that, I don't want to say easy majors, but like majors that like aren't really intensive, math heavy, really hard, where you're spending most of your time studying. Mm-hmm. College is a different experience, and you're going to be around a whole different crowd. Like, this is going to jump all over the place, but I mean, even looking back, like as an engineer, like I tried to avoid any electives where it was like philosophy or something like that, because they were just like, okay, here's a class where everyone just shares their opinion about what they believe. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, we all believe something. Great. Like, very cool. What do we learn here? That you believed something and I believe something. Some guy that's dead has believed something and he pointed out some good thoughts, and I don't know. To me, that's just that. Maybe that's just me. I'm pessimistic, but the engineering classes were like, okay, like this is going to help me graduate. This is going to help me with my degree, my future career. Like that's what I want to do. I don't want to spend years in college trying to find myself. I want to just go be an engineer.
Yeah. So intention had a lot to do with what impact university had on you. Like your intentions when you went there wasn't to like, it wasn't necessarily to discover yourself. It was to get a degree and become an engineer.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's, you know, when I say this, you know, find yourself kind of thing, it's not like, oh, I was like, I didn't know who I was. It was like, okay, it was like, no, I can literally do whatever I want now. There is literally like in high school, teachers go, okay, come on, like you need to pass this class, and they'll help you pass the class. In college, the teacher's like, I don't care if you don't pass this class. You don't have to show up. No one's going to follow up on you. You could have a scholarship and they'll just be like, all right, cool. Like you don't want to use it. Cool. We'll just pull it. You know, you don't want to show up. Whatever. Like no one's there to babysit you anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like you literally are in charge of everything. Your schedule, you pick when the classes are. You're doing everything. Like what classes you take. You have, you know, some assigned classes in terms of things to get your degree, but when you take them, how you take them is literally on you. Mm-hmm. You could be crazy and they tell you you can take like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but like 15 credits of course load, which is like, okay, like 15 units of engineering is a lot of work. I mean, that's more than an 8-hour day. That's like 12 units is the normal thing, and that's an 8-hour day. So you're looking at
class time, you mean?
Yeah, like class time, homework time, like
okay.
And it's probably more than that because some teachers don't understand that you're taking more than one class, so they're trying to fill the 8 hours by themselves. But yeah, I mean, so it's like everything is on you. You can decide everything. I mean, unless you live at home, I guess then it's a little bit different for some kids. But yeah, I mean, university, like one of the big experiences I had that I always think back on, and this is why I know university isn't like, I mean, again, if you go to a different university, I went to Cal Berkeley. People might say it's the most liberal university in the world. I mean, honestly, as an engineer, I just didn't see much. Mm. And even when I took classes that weren't engineering, like I took an anthropology class, and I still remember it to this day because, you know, everyone's like, oh, they're just going to spout evolution and all this stuff. And like, I had a teacher in an anthropology class. She's teaching about evolution. And she was actually really, really like center of the road. This is a theory. I believe it, but it's a theory. Mm-hmm. And like, she even like tried to show the class how silly some of the preconceived ideas are. Like, she literally showed 2 skulls on the screen for everyone to see, and it was like, okay, which one of these is a human and which one is not? And there are 2 different skulls, and like, without seeing them, you can look it up online. It's a common thing, but like, everyone said, oh, okay, there's one on the right, one on the right, one on the right. And like, some people knew that it was both of them were human. Mm. And she was trying to point this out to everyone. And it turns out like one was a skull of an African man and one was a skull of like an Asian man. Mm-hmm. You know, but there's just differences. And like, we just look at things and instantly assume like, oh, no, this has to be true. Mm-hmm. She said one of these is human. So only one is. And she's obviously baiting the class.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you have a preconceived idea. And she's like, look, okay, that's not how this works. And some professors obviously have beliefs and they try to pour them into people. But like, I don't think everyone does that. And when you're taking like engineering classes, it would have been weird for like my fluid dynamics teacher to start talking about his religion in the fluid dynamics. Like, we don't have the time. You know, it's got nothing to do with it. People would be like, why?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just, you know, college is one of those things where what you do, your intentions behind things, like you said, really do play a role.
So what would you say is like, when did you actually like decide I want to be a Christian and I want to live for Jesus? So you mentioned, that you don't know if you were saved when you went to college. And I guess just to like give a clear definition of being saved, it really is being saved those who are saved are those who have decided I'm going to follow Jesus and live for his purposes for the rest of my life. That's the identifying factor, right? When did you decide that that's what you wanted to do with your life?
I think that's the issue with all this is like knowing that definition is before I believed in God. I believed, there's a right way to live. I believed in a lot of different things. I had lots of beliefs, but at the same time, there was lots of things where I was like, well, how far does this actually need to go? Mm-hmm. Like you said, okay, you've decided I'm going to live for God for the rest of my life, right? But it's like, well, you have to really quantify that, I think, to some degree, because to live for God for the rest of your life, it's like you're not just talking about going to a church the rest of your life. Like, and that was the thing, is like I was happy to go to a church occasionally while I was in college. Again, mostly because my mom followed up on me and she was talking to me and like asking about things and making sure I was like still considering it, because she had seen my older brother go to college, slowly drift away, make his own decisions. And so she was kind of aware and seeing where I was. And my parents never like really harped on us, like, you have to do this. Like, they didn't even encourage me to go to college. My parents were like, look, if you want to go, cool. Like, we'll support you, morally. Like, like in terms of like, like, hey, good job. Like, keep up the good work, study hard. Like, it wasn't like they were going to pour out financially into my, like, they helped and stuff like that. But there was like, this is your decision. Like, you make the decisions, like, you follow through with them. And so when it came to Christianity, like, my mom would be like, okay, you go to church. Like, you should try to go to church. Like, I know you're busy, try to go to church. Like, and letting it be my decision. And so like in college, it finally clicked. That moment where I realized, like, I believe there is a God, but I've made compromises in so many different areas. And not like, oh my gosh, I'm just going out and getting drunk and doing drugs and all sorts of just terrible, stealing and murdering and killing people. This is just like, some things were probably little to other people. Like, my friends all still considered me a good person. My friends still considered me a Christian. My friends, like, we went to parties and stuff like that. My friends would not encourage me, like, go drink all the beer you can, Joe. It was like, they're like, look, you don't drink, cool. Like, don't drink. Like, don't even bother. Like, hey, if you haven't done it, don't even do it. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, just enjoy yourself. No, like, heavy peer pressure and stuff like that. And so I just realized, like, just little things where I was like, okay, I am not surrendered to God. Like, God has a role in my life, but it's not like he's Lord of my life. He's not making decisions. Like, I'm making decisions, and they revolve around God, or a belief in God. But it wasn't like, like, God is a priority. God was just a part of my life. And so when I finally like was going towards the end of my college cycle, I was senior. It was a little bit, it was about a senior. I don't remember exactly when in my senior year. I just remember like one night I showed up to church and I just had been looking back at my life and just realized, I'm like, there's nothing here in terms of like God is God in my life. Mm-hmm. Like, the word God could have been replaced with, anything. It could have been like Buddha, in terms of things. Like, it's like I believed in that thing called God. And I realized, like, what, like, this is just something I have to decide. Like, I'm either going to believe this or I'm not going to believe this. It just doesn't make sense to do both. You like, if I'm sleeping around and I'm like sleeping with one person, you can't just be like, oh, yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm committed to that person, but I'm gonna go sleep around other people too. It's like, you can't. It just doesn't make sense. It's like, and so it was like with God, I was like, okay, like this is kind of coming to the point where it's like I either make a decision to fully surrender my life and let him be Lord of my life, let him be God, or I don't. It doesn't make sense to be kind of wishy-washy because I'm making decisions like a Christian should, but I'm also making decisions that a Christian shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so it just really didn't make any sense to me in terms of things. And I was like, you know what? Like, I have to make a decision one way or the other. I didn't think about scripture. I didn't think about like, oh, God's going to spit me out for being lukewarm. None of that really played a role. I just looked at my life and it was just like, you know what? Like, either I believe this Christian thing or I don't. Mm-hmm. I could see how my older brother lived his life. And I was like, okay, like, he made decisions along the same track, but just decided, to step away from Christianity. And I was like, okay, like, I see where he came from. I see where he went. And am I on that same trajectory? Or am I going to course correct? Mm-hmm. So my senior year, I just decided, I was like, you know what? Like, I do believe in God. And I do believe this is real. So I have to make some decisions to course correct and surrender my life to God. I can't just keep verbally saying I believe in God while living, like you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. Like this is a funny thing about, like, I'll just throw in a tangent there. I'm talking for a long time here, but I remember going to a party and I had been, let's just say people, I like to play like card games and other things like that. And right. So I got good at it and I learned like count cards and shuffle ways and do things and cheat, let's just say. And my family had the reputation. They knew I was a little bit of a cheater. A little bit. No, I was a cheater. Because I got good at it. And I was like, you couldn't prove it. They just knew it. Right. And so in college, like, I still had these skills. And so like I remember at a party, like we were having like a poker night at this party. And like my friends were like, well, Joe's not drinking and Joe's, a good guy. Let him deal. Like, and he'll be the dealer for the table. Like, he'll be the house. Right? So it's a win-win for everyone kind of thing. Because, like, what personal involvement does Joe have? And I sat there and I was rigging the card game the entire time. And everyone was enjoying themselves because I wasn't favoring it one way or the other. But I realized, I'm like, everyone here thinks I am a good person. Everyone here, like, thinks I am a good friend. But what they don't know in this moment is that I am in complete control of this card game and essentially stealing money from one person to give it to the other person and then passing it back. And it's like, and I realized that like the final hand, I was like, you know what? Like if I tip it, like if I have this guy win, I know he's going to appreciate that he won and he was going to be like, yeah, he slipped me a 20 or something like that. So I was like, well, he's going to win. Like, because I'm going to get the best like tip for being the house dealer from him. And so I was like, okay, like he's going to win. And I made it really close, like a nail biter. But it was one of those things where you couldn't prove it. And it was so close that no one would have expected it. Like the river card comes out and he wins. Oh, it's like, but I just realized again, like just looking at the story, like I just realized I'm like, people can think you're a great person, think you're a good person. But like I was sitting there at the table and I'm like, I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Like if I know I'm a thief, like doesn't God see all this stuff that's working on the inside of us, like the things that other people don't see? I was like, this is all just fake, in terms of things. Like I can put on whatever title I want. I could have called myself a Buddhist and everyone would have been just fine with it. It was like Christianity was just another title. It wasn't actually who I was.
Yeah. So do you think that like the problems, a lot of what you're explaining right now is very counterintuitive to the thinking that university itself is the black hole, but it's like what we were just talking about in the beginning is that this idea of intention and what you're doing when you go to college. Some people go and their intention is to get away. I remember when I first moved out of my parents' house, I was ready to go. I was like, dude, I'm done. I don't want to do any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And my intention was to go out and just live it up. And so my question is, do you think that the problem is university, or is the problem people? Or the students, I should say.
It's a mix.
Where do you think would have been like the higher challenge to, like the harder challenge to your belief in a God? Like from the instructors and the professors, or from peers, or where would that have come from?
I mean, this is the thing. This is why I was trying to explain at the beginning. It's like, engineers, like, man, like we didn't really talk about politics. We didn't, like, there's not like a lot of like the other stuff. I mean, I even took poli-sci classes. So I took political science classes, and like we talked about politics there. But even then, like, it wasn't like something I was like super like, oh, give me all your beliefs. I could care less, because I was like, look, I'm going to be an engineer. I thought about minoring poli-science or something like that, because it seemed fun. But then at the same time, I was just like, again, I'm maybe a different person and going to different classes. So it's going to be a mix. Like, you're going to have like the university in some classes. Like, if you decide to do something that's really, I don't even know what the correct word would be now. But if you're not going to take something, if you're going to take a class that you're really more socially involved and more, like the more like classes that are just going to influence you more socially, or let people be more social, and not just like a math class where it's like, okay, 2 + 2 is 4. Okay, let's move on. There's no debate, no like real deep, like, how do you feel about that 2 + 2? It's like, there's just classes that are like arts classes and all those kind of things where it's like, it's all about, it's about feelings, it's about opinions and that kind of stuff. So those kind of classes are probably be more of a challenge to a Christian belief, because like, I've seen movies about universities, and I'm like, yeah, some of those professors do exist. They hate God. They want nothing to do with God. They don't want God mentioned, and then they will publicly defame God, which is kind of hilarious, because they don't want to talk about God, but they'll be spending all their time talking about God. But at the same time, like, if the student coming to school, like, I look back at most people that I know who went to university, just in my small bubble, that had a big role in where they headed. Like, if you love God and you want to live for God, you're going to make decisions to avoid certain things. You're going to be like, you know what, hey, this isn't for me. Like, I'm going to move on. Like, this professor, like, he's known to be like super flamboyant, or, not for me. Like, I'll take the other professor. I'll just take it a different time. Like, but if you don't care, if you're more open to like, you know what, I just want to see what's out there. I want to explore, and your intentions are just like, I want to see what the world has to offer. It's like, well, then you're going to sample the wares of the world. I mean, look at the prodigal son. He went to a city where he could go spend all his money and do whatever he wanted. Like, that was his intention. He didn't go to like a nice little village in the countryside to buy a little chateau and, live a quiet, peaceful life. He literally chose a city where he could go live in debauchery and do whatever he wanted. This, you could blame it on the city, you could blame it on the son, like, take your pick. But at the same time, it's like his intentions led him to a place where it existed, and that place influenced him.
So why didn't that lifestyle of like free living and, college debauchery, why didn't that appeal to you as much? Because like I said, I know people, I know you know people as well, that college was like blast town. Actually, when I first, my first living on my own experience was when I was like 17, and me and my parents got in this like huge fight, and my parents were just like, if you want to, live this way, you're out. And so I was like, groovy, I'm done, I'm gone. So I called my cousin, who was living on his own at the time. He was going to college. He's actually going to university. And I moved up and lived with him. And we just lived basically in like a, our own makeshift dorm house. It was like a party central, and that appealed to me, and it appealed to everybody I was with there, and a lot of them were church kids, and my cousin himself was a church kid, but that appealed to us. We didn't want to go to church. We didn't even want to think about God or like making that kind of decision, but that path didn't necessarily seem the same to you. You went to college, you had an intention when you went there, and you stayed to that intention to the point where you are an engineer now. You went that route. You stayed that course. But how come that lifestyle didn't appeal to you? And then why do you think it appeals so much to others?
I think it's exposure. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, did you have an instant exposure to, everything, or was it just samples in terms of things? Like, were you able to jump right in, or were you slowly exposed to things?
Yeah, I saw things from a distance, and then kind of slowly jumped into it myself. I definitely took more bite sizes, but I was a little bit more like I would take a bite and then jump. Like it was a bite and then a jump.
Yeah, for me, like when I was, in high school and junior college and then college, it was like, I guess my exposure was so slow, and then having older brothers and watching their lives and seeing things play out like in high school, like you're obviously there's other kids. I was going to not a Christian high school, and I'm exposed to all sorts of things. But it was like at the same time, like there was an influence from the church, and like so I was leading a Bible study. To be honest, I didn't want to lead the Bible study. I was like, man, why am I qualified?
How did you end up leading a Bible study?
Well, it was like, Joe, like you're the oldest male at the high school. Like this thing is like, it was like, okay, like the decision wasn't really mine. I was like, okay, I could do this, but like, do I want to do it like every week? And that was things like, I know every week you should do a Bible study. Like every week you should be promoting. So every week you should be outreaching. Every week you should be doing this stuff. And I was like, okay, but this is someone else telling me every week I should go do this. Like there was no inspiration to be like, Joe, like, do you want to do this? Like, what do you think? It was like here, like in that case, it was like here, like you should do this, which I think in some ways was a negative effect to me. Cause like, negative and positive, like negative in terms of like, I looked at it as like, this is now a giant chore that I hate doing.
Yeah.
Even though it taught me some good skills in terms of things like I was reading my Bible and I was learning things and I was doing things. I was like, but it was like, it's like reading a book you don't want to read. It's like in high school, you look at some of these books that they make you read and you're like, why do I have to read Shakespeare? Why do I have to read Hamlet? Like, but now it's like, some of those stories and you're like, I will never forget those stories. And it was like, okay, in some ways it's like, okay, it teaches you things that you normally wouldn't have done. But at the same time, I looked at it and it was, again, like junior college, like I'm still living in my parents' house, mostly out of the house in terms of, like I spent most of the day outside the house and then came home, ended the day to sleep. That's basically what it was. I had my own room. I was kind of left to do whatever I wanted. So my exposure thing was kind of like bite-sized chunks, maybe similar to yours, but I was always coming back to the church as a reference kind of thing. So I was always looking at things and watching things from a distance because I wasn't able to fully jump in. And so even when I got to college, it was like I looked at so much stuff and watched so much stuff and seen so much play out. I was like, I know how the story goes. And I'd watch people and be like, okay, you're gonna get drunk to the point you're sick because you're trying to impress this person. Like, you're having a good time, sure, and you're gonna do your thing. Like, they're just like categories of people. And like they're kind of surprised by the outcomes. And I was like, how are people surprised by the outcomes? Like, you did this, so this happened. Like, I don't know. So I guess maybe my brain was a little bit more analytical than it should have been. But like, I was just looking at things like, I was so super shocked. Like, and this was like kind of my exposure things is like, I moved into a college apartment, and it was kind of a dorm, but it was a apartment. It basically was like upper level, because I was coming in to UC Berkeley as an older kid, junior, because I'd already taken classes and just jumped right into a junior year. So my experience at college was not the first half, where like all the high school kids are going in, which probably would have been worse. because I can just see all those kids and how wild they were, because now they're free and they think they're king of the world.
Yeah.
So I'm going in as an older kid, not having been exposed to that, but I'm in a dorm. And I remember this kid in the dorm, the youngest one of us, really liked a girl. Really liked a girl. Like, really liked this girl. I don't know how else to explain it besides just emphasizing that. Okay, was in love with this girl. Let's just say it that way. And one of my other roommates, who wasn't really interested in the girl, kind of got the vibe that she liked him. And he was like, well, I have no loyalties to this other guy. So they end up sleeping together. And I'm a third party watching this whole thing play out. Now she expects the guy she slept with to be in love with her. Mm. And he's like, nah, you were just, fun. Like, I never committed to anything. Like, so she lost both people. The guy who was like infatuated with her is now like over it because his roommate has now slept with the girl he was infatuated with. And the guy who slept with her was like, look, you were just a fun one night stand. And so she was just angry with the world. And I was like, but how did you not see this coming? Like, you, the one relationship that might have turned out well, you denied, and you went for the quick guy who was probably a one night stand no matter what you did. Like, and you knew that going in. So again, I'm looking at all this stuff from third party, and I'm looking at just watching it all play out. And again, long, detailed stories to fill in time, I guess. But I'm watching it and I'm like, look, how do people not understand certain things are going to play out? Like, how do you not know if you just keep drinking all night long that you're going to eventually throw up and get like drunk out of your mind or blood poisoning or something like that? It was like, I mean, even the kids in college knew, like, okay, you can't drink like liquor and then beer or beer and then liquor. Like you have to drink them in certain orders. Like people knew things went a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so I just absorbed all that stuff and absorbed it all. I was like, okay, like if you do it this way, you're stupid kind of thing. And my thinking it was just like, it's going to turn out bad. I was like, you can't, like no one gets out of things. I don't remember. It's been forever, but like, it's like, and this isn't a podcast about drinking, but at the same time, I was like, okay, if you drank one before the other, you always got sick. And I was like, okay, well then you should never drink this one before this one. Like, regardless of what happens, like you shouldn't do it. If you know you're going to do both, like you should always do this one first and then this one. So I looked at life like that. I was like, okay, like here's how it should work. And so when I looked at, some of the stuff and some things going on, I was like, okay, this is how it's going to play out. So I don't want to involve them in that. I remember we watched a TV show in college and there was the saddest pickup line ever where this guy just like literally lied and said he's like, oh, my name's on this building. I'm an architect, like blah, blah. And it was like some wild story that it just is so unbelievable. And that was the point. It was like, it's so unbelievable. Like the person was kind of faced with like, A, you're just blatantly lying, or B, it's so wild. Maybe it's true. Mm-hmm. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I was like, no one would believe this. So we tried it at a party and it worked. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like this is a TV show pickup line. Like, how do people not see this stuff? And it's like, they do. They just don't want to believe it's going to be bad for them. And that was the thing, is like I was looking at things and I'm just going, okay, like from a third party, I'm looking at it as someone who grew up in a Christian household, watching how things played out from my other brothers, watching how it plays out for my friends.
Like the negatives, you mean?
The negatives and the positives. Yeah, the negatives and the positives. And so I was like, okay, like, so I did partake of some of the stuff in college. Like I did. I'm not going to deny that. Like I had a girlfriend and we did stuff. I went to parties and stuff like that. And it's like, but like I knew where the lines kind of were. And I was like, okay, like you cross this line, like this is going to happen. Like when I was in junior college, I met a guy who said, okay, like he had a certain limit for how much to drink. And he learned that really quickly. And I was like, okay, like there should be a limit to how much you drink if you're going to drink. Like, just like I said about the beer and the liquor thing. It's like all these things. It's like, and so when I looked at all this stuff from the background with a Christian standpoint, I was like, okay, like what does some of the Bible say? Like, what does my church think? What does like my parents think? What do I think about this stuff? And so it was always kind of like just over processing things. And so, different kind of person, most people maybe don't do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like that was just how like I floated through college. I was just like, if it's not logical, if it doesn't make sense, like you're not different than everyone else. Like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what I looked at everyone. I was like, why would you think you're different than everyone else? Like, you're going to get the same result, you know?
So Mariah's got a question here. She says, actually some comments in question. As someone who partied my way out of university during my freshman year, my thought is that it's up to the student whether they will step away from their Christianity or not. Outside influence at university notwithstanding, I think it comes down to depth of relationship with Jesus. Joe, do you think things would have been different if your relationship with Jesus had been stronger at the time? To rephrase, do you think kids' strong relationship with Jesus can continue that through their entire time at university?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we said about intention. I mean, it literally goes back to that very first thing we talked about. It was like, Mariah partied her way out of college. She didn't have a background in Christianity. There was no maybe reference point of what she should or shouldn't do in terms of things. Like, it was like, I don't know the whole story. I don't know if someone was telling her, hey, you shouldn't do this kind of stuff. Like, in terms of like, not like, oh, you shouldn't like go be, a drunkard in the street. Like, everyone kind of like understands that concept, or you shouldn't sleep around. But at the same time, it's like, people do it. And so it's like, is someone actively breathing down her neck saying like, don't do this? And for like me, it might have been different, like in terms of things like, had I had a stronger relationship, but at the same time, I'm like, I think things turned out the way they did because of my relationship. I kind of was in the middle of the road, and I was like, okay, like, here's what I know a Christian should do, and here's what I want to do. Like, if they coincide, okay. And if they don't coincide, like, what do I choose? And so I kind of was always thinking in that kind of realm. Like, I remember being in college parties. It's like, okay, do I want to drink or do I not want to drink? And there was another Christian guy that I was friends with. And I remember watching him too. And like, he was kind of facing the same dilemma too. Like, do I drink or do I not drink? And for a while, like, he didn't drink. So I was like, oh, it was pretty easy to say, like, he's not drinking, so I won't drink, kind of thing. But then he finally got to the point where he's like, you know what? Forget it. Like, I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was like, well, what do I decide? Like, I can't make a decision just because he made a decision. Like, and I kind of was like, well, let me just see how it plays out for him. And I just saw, like, he was just drinking beer, sitting on the couch with everyone else. I'm like, well, what? Doesn't seem like he's any happier. He just now is drinking beer instead of Coke. Like, I mean, that literally. And so, like, so that's the thing, is like, my relationship with God, like, did play somewhat of a role, because I started thinking, like, is this right? Is this wrong? In some cases, I obviously didn't care. I was like, well, this is what I want to do. And I think if someone has a stronger, confidence or a stronger relationship in terms of things like understanding that who God is, mm-hmm. and what that means, like in terms of like what a Christian actually means, like not just Christian in name, but Christian in action, like I am Christ-like. Yeah, someone stronger could go to college and turn out just fine. But again, like when we say college, it's so generic, because online college.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to online college and you suddenly backslide because you've just been in your house all day on the computer, it's like, well, it wasn't really the college atmosphere. It was something else, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the thing, is like, if you go out of your parents' house, again, like I think the kid has been raised for 18 years or however long, it's like you're sending them off. It's like you instilled some good things in them, hopefully. And now you see how that plays out. Like, you plant an avocado seed, it doesn't always mean the avocado is going to taste good. I mean, that's one of the things about life is like you could plant a good seed, it could grow, but what it produces is kind of an unknown until it's actually produced. And it's like, okay, you've been ministering to your kid, bringing them up in school, and they could turn out just fine. Mm-hmm. Or there could be things underneath the surface that you as a parent maybe never dealt with, or they as a child were hiding. And it's like, now it's going to just play out. College was just an avenue for it to play out. If they moved to a different state and just didn't go to college, it might have played out the same way.
Yeah.
It's obviously there is influence. College is a place where there's going to be some influence. I mean, obviously there was kids partying in front of me. You know, if I never went outside and always lived in a bubble, that influence would have never been there. But I think at the same time, like, it wasn't the fact that I was at UC Berkeley that was a terrible thing. It's like I could have been at any university. It just happened I went to University of California, Berkeley.
So when you gave your life to Jesus and you finally made a decision, it's like, I don't want to live this life that I'm watching play out in other people. I do want to live for God. I want to be a Christian. I want this to be who I am. Was that like a dramatic experience? I mean, we talked about testimonies on here as well that are like really dramatic, and there's a lot involved, and, you know, heaven opens and God's voice booming out, and, you know, I died for you. And, you know, there's like this like very dramatic experience. For you, it sounds more like it was just the decision that made sense. Is that accurate? Or, you know, what was involved in you giving your life to Jesus?
Maybe I'm underplaying it. I don't know. But like, I mean, like,
it just sounds like a lot of the decisions you made throughout were just more like, this is a logical thing to do. Not from the standpoint.
I mean, there were obviously, like, I have emotions. Like, I'm not going to even try to be like pastors.
I wasn't implying that at all, Joe.
Like, I'm just like, I mean, because that's the thing. We all have emotions. But like, I just was like, I mean, I was just always the person who was like, flying the wall, middle child, you know, like I'm quiet, introvert person, slow to get going and stuff like that, and had all these opportunities and stuff like that. And my decision to commit to God, to say I'm surrendering my life to you, was maybe not a dramatic heaven's doors opening up, light shining from heaven. In fact, like, when I tell the testimony, like, I literally showed up to a church on a Sunday night, I think it was. Yeah, it was a Sunday night. I do not remember one word Pastor Ford preached. Not a single word. I think there was going to be a play coming up or something like that too, and that's all. That's as far as the details go on that night, basically. I just felt convicted because I was looking at my life and going, if God is real, and if all this stuff is true, there is no way, shape, and form that, like, I am a Christian and I'm living for God. In fact, I know the things I'm doing, the Bible says, don't do. And it tells us, you know, no liar, no thief, no fornicator, no drunkard, no like brawler, no will inherit the kingdom of heaven. And so I was like, okay, scripture is pretty plain. Yeah, it lists every sin kind of under the sun, but it's like, well, if I fall into any one of those categories, I should probably think about, you know, I fall under this category, so does that mean I'm not going to heaven? And when I sat down, I was like, no, there's no reason why I would go to heaven. I'm like, could I say my life is equivalent to someone who surrendered their life to Jesus Christ, who lived like he did? I'm like, no, there's no way. So when I showed up that night, I was convicted to my core, like, if I keep doing this, I am eventually going to walk away from Christianity. Or at the very best, be one of those people who says, I am a Christian, goes to church once in a while to feel good about going to church every once in a while. Still believe in God, I still believe in God kind of thing, but it's going to fade. I watched it happen to my older brother. I watched it happen to other people. It's like, and I knew it. I was like, sat down in that moment. I was like, okay, this is a moment where I have to make a decision. Like, my future is at a crossroads. I keep living how I'm living, and the world might think I'm a fine and dandy kid, like, have no qualm with me, or I surrender my life to God. And that was the only thing about that night I knew, and I wrestled with that thought over and over and over and over. And I remember the altar call in terms of things I was like, if I don't do this now, I just felt so convicted. I was like, I have to make a decision now. I can't, like, you can't kick against the goads and like not build up a callus eventually. It was like, okay, like God, like this is a conviction moment. I'm still showing up to church, which was a surprise to me. And I think just because of my mom's prayers and continually believing and having an influence in my life, that I did continue to go. But in that moment, I was like, okay, like this is my decision. I'm doing this. And then, like, I'll be honest, like it was not an easy decision in terms of things, because I knew what that meant. And I was like, okay, there's a lot to unpack here, because there's a lot of like two different lives. There's like the Joe that like the church world kind of sees, and Joe that certain other people see. And it's like, okay, there's two Joes. Do they meet in the middle? Does this one die? Does this one, kind of morph into something else? Like, what happens? And I didn't talk to people about anything. I tried to just figure it out on my own, and it was the biggest struggle. The biggest struggle for probably a year or more of my initial Christianity, because I was like, I have no clue. I don't really want to talk about this stuff because it's not the best stuff to talk about, because it's like, I mean, it's hilarious, and not to diss anyone or anything like that. Like, it was just hilarious because like I realized how much can be hidden from people. It was like when I gave my life to God that night, I said, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. You prayed with me. And Pastor Ford came up to me after, and he's like, Joe, what does this mean? Like kind of like, why did you pray? Like, like I thought you were a Christian, Joe. Like, I don't get this. And he was like trying to put pieces together. And like after the fact, kind of like, the click, the light bulb kind of moment is like, but in that moment, it was just like, and I realized, I'm like, okay, like it is too easy to be two people.
Yeah.
It is just way too easy. You can like people, oh, you're, eventually things will come out. And it's like, yeah, eventually things will come out, but like it could be years down the road. Yeah. And for me, it was years down the road that eventually like it was coming out to certain people. Hadn't even caught up to the church crowd yet that I was living a whole separate life. And I'm like, and some of the things I'm like, this is pretty obvious. Like, I don't see how people haven't put two and two together. But after the fact they did. Like, I brought my girlfriend to church one day, and everyone's like, hey, like, you brought a girl to church. Like, Joe is witnessing. Joe. And it was like, and I was like,
that's not what I thought when I saw you bring a girl to church.
But some people did. And yeah. But and I was thinking, like, people were like encouraged, and I'm like, folks, like, I'm trying to get on track, and like, this is part of the problem here, and I'm trying to like course correct here in this moment. And that's the thing, is like, so in that moment when I gave my life to God, it wasn't heavens opening up, it wasn't shining lights, it wasn't trumpets playing, it was a quiet moment in terms of things. But I think about it in terms of like Paul's testimony, and thought about it. You know what? God doesn't have to like shine a light down on you, make you blind to have that same experience that like Paul had. Like, because to me, like, I remember I was sitting in my room laying on my bed when I had that thought, like, this is a decision moment time. Like, this is a decision moment time. Like, I decide in this moment, will I live for God or will I not? And so when I show up to church, it was like showing up and I was like, okay, like, pray for me to get rid of the scales off my eyes. It was like, okay, it's like, that was just an outflow. I was just doing what I was told to do. It's like, okay, I'm going to show up to church because that's where I can get prayed for and that's where I can get help. So the powerful moment, it was still there. The testimony is still there, but it was like no shining light. Yeah. But at the same time, like, I realized like that was a pivot point in my life, because even though I struggled because I was prideful, like, that was the moment where I said, you know what, like, I need to start making decisions. And that rooted me to the point where now, like, and this is what would help maybe kids going away to college, is if you have that root, you can start making decisions to say no to that thing, that temptation, that used to be something there for you.
Yeah.
It was just like, no, I started saying no to things. I started telling my friends, like, no, I'm just not going to be involved with this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. Like, no, like I'm going to do this Christian. I'm going to live as a Christian. Like, I know you thought I was living as a Christian before, but no, I'm going to really live for a Christian. And some of the guys, like some people wanted to show up to the church to see, because they're like, what, like, why? Like, what made you change? Like, what's going on? And so people did show up to the church.
So people saw you change. There actually was a visible change. It wasn't like Joe's just a good guy. Now it's like all of a sudden Joe's a Christian, like a real Christian.
Well, it's just like Joe's making decisions. Like, why is Joe making these decisions? And I wasn't like being like over the top, like, I'm a Christian now, like in people's faces. It's just like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, I want to be a Christian.
Yeah.
And I know before you thought I was a Christian, but no, I wasn't. Come on. And it's like, and it was like, again, like some of the people came, like one of my best friends, like from college, like came to the church. He even prayed to get saved. I was a little bit too aggressive in that moment, because I was like, man, like this could be a life. Like I was just too in his face, because I was just so like just seeing what was happening to me, kind of thing, being like, okay, like this is real. I've made a decision, and I was just like pouring that all out too quickly, probably into this guy's life. He went off and he changed. He went to another church and did some stuff, and I don't know if he's a Christian to this day, but because we kind of lost contact over things, because just the nature of my decision making separated me from some of these people and what decisions they were making. But yeah, like it's just one of those things where it's like, okay. And again, that first year there was lots of struggles, because there was like not dramatic swings, like, oh, just I don't know if I can make it, I'm gonna go back to sin. It was just like, no, like, oh, there's this part of my life that's troublesome, or this sin involvement, this issue, this thought process, this temptation that I hadn't even considered, and be like, oh, I have to deal with that now. Oh, and then me trying to solve it, and then realizing I can't do it, going to God and be like, okay, help me here, because I'm like not going to anyone else, kind of thing, going and be like, hey, okay, like here's how you solve this, Joe, like we've already done it, like here's what you do, kind of thing, like we can pray for you and help you out. It was like, every kind of moment I was like, okay, another hard lesson, I knew that 2x4 on the head, and just realizing, okay, decision making. And what it came down to is like, we make decisions on what we're going to do.
Yeah. So you became a Christian, like you're kind of already talking about it, but maybe you can go into a little bit more specific. So like what started actually changing for you? You started making decisions at school, but like, what changed as far as your Christianity goes? Like what was different? Are you just going to church more now? Are you just, are you starting to actually read your Bible on your own and not having to do it for a Bible study? Like, what was like what were the specific changes?
You know what? It wasn't like over the top. I could just be like, oh, you know what? I just started going to church every day, and I read my Bible every day or something every day. It was kind of more like it's like, okay, as things kind of were shown to me, revealed either through a sermon or through prayer or through Bible reading or something like that. I was like, okay, here's a decision I have to make. Like I had to make a decision. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I have shown up to church sporadically over the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? Like, am I going to start showing up to church consistently? Like, I mean, I have all the same excuses. Am I going to keep living that way? And it was like, okay, like I just have to make decisions. And I think that was the thing. It was like, it wasn't like, suddenly there was like a 180 in terms of like lifestyle action. I wore a suit and tie the next day to church. It's like, no, it's like, I just started making decisions. Like pastor started, the church was moving from SF to like Brian's house, and then eventually to San Mateo. And I was like, okay, like I want to follow through with this. Like Pastor Ford invited me to come he said, oh, we're going to move the church out of SF. I had no idea what was going on, so I won't even go into that San Francisco thing. But like, I was like, okay, like this is like, God, like I can see like, you're going to help me through this. Like the church isn't going to just disappear and I'm going to be left alone. Like So I need to be involved in the church. Like I need to be around these people. Like if I'm gonna survive, like I need to do these things. And that was my thing. Like I started showing up to church. I guess you could say more, but it was more my attitude. Is like when I was in church, it was like, okay, like I want to be there. I want to be involved. I want to hear from God. I want to just do more than just sing some songs and feel good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to actually meet with God. You know, when I started reading my Bible, it was like, okay, God, I want you to genuinely do something. I don't want to just read a book. You know, it's like, I didn't want to just sit there and memorize scripture. I was like, I want this to actually mean something. Like, I don't want to just know the Bible better than other people. I want this to actually change my life. You know, that was the thing about my Christianity. It was like, I want this to be real. I don't want it to be just a name thing.
Yeah.
And that was really the thing about it. It's just, I wanted something real.
So let me ask you this last question. We're actually a little bit over time, but there, you know, the drama, honestly, and the dramatic in a lot of people's conversion is this, it is, and, you know, to kind of go back and restate things to where we're not underplaying what's actually happening in a conversion experience, is there's this moment where God gets involved in somebody's life. How did your experience with God and who he is and his interaction in your life change from before and to after? Like, what was the difference in God's involvement and your realization of who he really was?
This goes to kind of what we were talking about even before, not to spoil anything from that, but just God revealed himself to me. Like before, it was like I knew of God, I knew about God, and in that moment, it was like, okay, God said, like, okay, here's who I actually am. Like you know scriptures, you know things, okay, but here's like who I really am, and started getting a revelation of like, oh, use revelation. Started getting an understanding of like who God actually is and what this all meant and everything. That was really it. Like, it's just, I mean, maybe it's that simple. I mean, and I'm not maybe I'm underselling all this stuff. You know, I'm not the most hype, but it's like
I think you've shown us that throughout this podcast.
But it's like, it's the thing is like, it doesn't change the fact that like, and this is the part that like, I think a lot of people want the hype. A lot of people want that, like my Christianity like is based on hype. And it's like, well, it's like, you know, that if like, there's tons of like emotionally based things driving your actions, like, and not just this, you know what? God died on the cross for my sins and everyone else's sins because we are sinful people. He loves me. There's that emotion part to it. But it's at the same time, it's like, okay, but he wants to be Lord of my life. He didn't just do this to be a best friend. He didn't just do this to have a good feeling. You know, I died for all those humans. I'm such a good person. Such a good God. Who does that? You know, it's like, no, he wanted a genuine relationship with us. He wants a genuine relationship with people. And I think that's the thing that like is really behind all this stuff. It's like, okay, like I want this to be real, God. Like you want it to be real, God. So I want it to be real too. Like I don't want to just know you in like spirit. Like the Bible says, no, spirit and truth. It's like, I want this to be a real thing, not just an emotional thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how it's played out in all these years. Like I just, you know, I think that's what makes Christianity consistent for people who like you can kind of, you know in the long run kind of thing, like if it's here to stay in your life, because you can look at it and be like, okay, like is there dramatic swings in my Christianity where I'm like, one day I'm like, I don't want to do this, and then the next day like, oh God, I'm so sorry, God. I'm just the biggest screw up. It's like, you know, it's like if those are huge, huge swings years down the road in your life as a Christian, it's like, how rooted is your relationship with Christ? Like, you know, I don't want to take control again at the very end of this podcast, but is, you know, I when I witness to people, I'm like, if this is a relationship, if you have a relationship with God, In my case, I'm a male. So like if I had a wife, which I do, if I'm married to her and I never talk to her or have like an affair with someone else or have these dramatic swings, it's like, how good is my relationship with that person?
Yeah.
And most people will be honest, like, okay, well, if you're sleeping around other people, you don't have a good relationship. If you never talk to your wife, you don't have a good relationship. Like, if you're fighting all the time, you don't have a good relationship. And I'm like, okay, well, why is that different than our relationship with God?
Yeah.
It's like it should be a consistent thing. It should get better and better and better in time. It shouldn't be like, you know what? When I first became a Christian, and today I don't know what the difference is. Like that'd be a sad relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of like if it was still all the rocky roads, like no, it should have got better in time. You should at least be able to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things, if I could, bringing this to kind of a conclusion, there's what you've kind of drawn out and kind of gleaned from my last podcast with Pastor Ford is how simple this all really is. Even in the complexity of university, you have like all these different opinions and opportunities and influences. You have hundreds of thousands of people in universities across just the United States that are going in with different ideas and intentions of what they want to do, why they're there, including church kids, including believers and non-believers alike, people all gathering into one place and things just getting really super complicated. But then when you bring God into university, when you actually bring him there, things really are quite simple. It is really simple. And so the reason why I'm asking you the questions of like, why, was it dramatic? Was it, how come this stuff didn't influence you? It just, things are much more simple in the way you look at them, the way you think about them. And that might be a personality thing, but it also is kind of an encouraging lesson to people that like, don't overthink things. Don't overthink the whole university thing. God's really big and he's able to simplify things because he sees everything from this higher perspective. And your life and your conversion is consistent as well. I prayed with you, is that like 12 years ago now? 11,
yeah.
12 years ago?
12 years.
12 years ago. So 12 years, you've consistently stayed a Christian for 12 years, consistently stayed saved, made decisions. You're now married. You've been an engineer for a while. You've been in the church. You've been involved consistently, faithfully, simply. And it's like all of this really is super simple. We bring in these podcasts. We have questions that people ask, and sometimes questions that are asked with a lot of complicated non-answer in their head. But the answers are really so simple. God is so simple. And scripture is so easy to understand when you just stop complicating the whole thing.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I mean, it's just, it really is in some ways like, even if the answer is complex, it can be simple in understanding like, okay, it's a complex answer. And that's pretty simple in terms of things. Like, okay, like there might be a lot of nuances and different ways things can go, but as long as you understand like, okay, that's just how it is going to work.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple in itself. Like, and when it comes to Christianity, I think in university, it's like, the answer is kind of simple. It just depends on what is driving that person's life. I think if you go to college, to wrap this all up in a summary, it's like if you go to college and you want to live for God, you'll be just fine. You'll be just fine. You might get heckled. You might have a bad time in terms of like, you might not make friends with everyone there. But at the same time, like you'll turn out just fine. And it's like, if you don't know where you're at, well, obviously there's going to be a pull. Like if God is real, then the devil's just as real. So he's going to pull you in a direction. And it's like, if you're wishy-washy, he's not going to be like, surprise, I'm the devil. Ha, let's go to hell. It's like, no, it's just going to be like, okay, like, what about this thing? Here's something to entice you. He's not going to be stupid. If you a slow downward grade is enough to make you end up at the valley if you were living on the mountain. It's like, it doesn't have to be a cliff. Mm-hmm. And obviously, and that's just the simple reality I think parents need to realize is like, don't be afraid of university and try to like hold your kids back in terms of things. Is like, teach your kid the way they ought to go. And it's like, if you've done everything you're supposed to do, like they're going to make decisions and, be there to be an influence. Like,
Yeah.
you can have a profound effect. I mean, my mom, like, maybe didn't know how bad my life was in terms of like sin and all that stuff, but at the same time, like, just that little input of like, hey, like, you should go to church, like, praying for you, the little things, like, what an impact that had, because like one day I went to church and I got saved.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was still going to university. Like,
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. I appreciate you joining me tonight, Joe. I know Joe's not the type to volunteer for this, but I asked him if he would do it, and he willingly said yes. And so I appreciate you joining tonight. It was a special treat for tonight. Pastor Ford will be back next week. And tomorrow night, we are going to be here in person, as always, Wednesday night, regular service. We encourage you to join us, especially if you've never been in person. Come. I'll be here. Joe will be here, and other folks that have given their lives to Jesus and have a testimony of who God is and what he can do in somebody's life. Personally, it really is not a complicated question. God can make things so simple for you. You've got to take a step forward and allow him to do what he wants and show you who he is. So that's it for tonight. We'll see everybody very soon.